My name is Chloe, I'm 30 years old, and I never thought my expertise in art would save me from being exiled by my own family. Coming back home for Thanksgiving after 5 years away felt like stepping into an elegantly set trap. My sister Olivia had always been the golden child, while I was cast as the permanent disappointment. What I didn't realize was that this particular dinner would detonate everything when I slid that simple manila folder across the table. Where are you listening from today? I'd be fascinated to know in the comments. Please do like and subscribe if stories about complicated family dynamics speak to you. Have you ever felt betrayed by the very people who were supposed to love you unconditionally? Let me share my story with you. Growing up in our affluent home in a Chicago suburb was an exercise in shaping who we were all meant to become. Our family had a certain standing to protect in the community, a fact my parents, Helen and Robert, never let us forget. From the very beginning, the contrast between my sister Olivia and me was painted in bold, unmissable strokes. Being 4 years my senior, Olivia established a benchmark of perfection that I could never hope to approach. Our childhood home was a grand Tudor-style house, with lawns so perfect they looked like green velvet, and an interior that seemed lifted directly from the pages of an architectural digest. My parents had earned their success. My father built a wealth management firm from the ground up, while my mother curated their expanding art collection, a hobby that had morphed into a serious portfolio of investments. They had high hopes for both of their daughters, but those hopes were never distributed equally. Olivia excelled in every area that held value for our parents. Her perfect grades in school, especially in economics and mathematics, made them radiate with pride. When she was elected president of the debate team and made captain of the varsity lacrosse team, my father would brag about it to his clients at company dinners. Her trajectory was set early on. She was destined to join him in the family firm and, one day, take the reins. I, on the other hand, was drawn to the world of art and creation. While Olivia was busy with calculations and strategic planning, I was sketching and painting. My bedroom was a chaotic sanctuary of canvases and art supplies, not a display of trophies and academic accolades. My mother would sometimes offer a compliment on my work, but it was always tinged with a subtle disappointment that I hadn't inherited her sharp eye for collecting, rather than her hands for creating. Art is a lovely hobby, Chloe, but it's not a viable career, she would often say, patting my arm with a smile that felt more like pity than encouragement. The pattern of favoritism was etched into countless small daily moments. When Olivia got her early acceptance letter to Northwestern, my parents hosted a lavish party with over 50 guests. When I was accepted into the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, they offered a simple nod and immediately asked about the availability of scholarships. Her birthdays were celebrated with weekend getaways to New York City. Mine were marked with a store-bought cake, and if I was lucky, a new set of paints. The first profound betrayal happened when I was a junior in high school. I had poured months of effort into a complex mixed media piece for a major regional art competition. I spent endless nights hunched over my desk, infusing every detail with my soul. The piece was an abstract exploration of family dynamics, using isolated figures in a shared space, linked only by invisible tense threads. It was intensely personal, and to my astonishment, it won first prize. The local newspaper wanted to feature me. When the reporter came to our home, Olivia somehow managed to insert herself into the interview. Before I understood what was happening, she was eloquently explaining my artistic vision, as though she had been my mentor all along. She claimed she had helped me conceptualize the piece, that we had worked on it together during sister art sessions that had never ever taken place. Chloe has such a raw, untamed talent, and I've been teaching her the fundamentals of composition and color theory, she told the journalist, as my parents nodded along in proud agreement. When the article was published, featuring a photograph of both of us and crediting Olivia as my artistic collaborator, I confronted them all at the dinner table. "Why did you lie?" I asked Olivia, my eyes burning with unshed tears. "You never help me. You don't even care about art." My father set down his utensils with that stern, room-silencing expression. "Your sister was being supportive, Chloe. This constant jealousy of yours is becoming a serious issue. Olivia is trying to elevate your profile, and you react with these wild accusations." My mother let out a weary sigh. "Honestly, Chloe, you should be thankful. Having Olivia's name attached to your project gives it a level of credibility it wouldn't otherwise have." Olivia just offered her flawless, practiced smile and said, "I was just trying to help. You know how you get tongue-tied, trying to explain your work." That night, I learned a brutal lesson. My truth would always be a distant second to the carefully crafted family narrative. I retreated even further into my art, using it as my sole sanctuary. While Olivia followed her prescribed path to an elite business school, I secretly applied to art colleges. When the acceptance letters started arriving, my announcement at dinner that I was committing to SAIC was met with a stunned silence that quickly curdled into fury. "We will not finance 4 years for you to indulge in a hobby," my father declared, his voice cold. "If you are determined to squander your potential, you will do so on your own." My mother attempted a gentler tactic later that evening. "Darling, we just want what's best for you. An art career is so uncertain. What about studying marketing, or perhaps art administration? Those are respectable fields related to your interests." But I remained resolute, even as they officially cut off all financial support. I managed to scrape together a combination of scholarships, student loans, and the income from 2 part-time jobs. Every single semester was a desperate struggle to remain enrolled, while Olivia lived in a high-end apartment near her campus, entirely funded by our parents. During those college years, holidays at home became progressively more strained. I would return to find Olivia being meticulously groomed for her role at the firm, sitting in on my father's business meetings, dressed in tailored suits that mirrored our mother's own polished style. I would show up with paint permanently wedged under my fingernails, wearing clothes from thrift stores that were all my budget allowed. By the time we graduated, the chasm between us was complete. Olivia attended my graduation ceremony, but my parents cited a sudden business emergency that prevented them from coming. I received a card with a token check that wouldn't have covered a single month's rent in any major city. Meanwhile, for her graduation, Olivia received a brand new convertible and a junior partner position at my father's firm. The message couldn't have been more direct. One daughter was the prime investment. The other was a liability to be written off. After graduation, I was slammed with the harsh reality that so many art students face. A world not particularly eager to pay for their passion. With student loan payments looming and no family safety net, I moved into a tiny apartment in a less fashionable part of Chicago with 3 roommates I found online. The space was barely big enough for us, let alone for a studio, but it was all I could afford while I searched for a job. Those initial months were punishing. I sent applications to every gallery, museum, and art-related business in the city. Most didn't bother to reply. The few interviews I landed went nowhere once they discovered I had no influential connections in the insular art world. My prestigious degree felt worthless without the network that was supposed to accompany it. During this time, my contact with my family shrunk to perfunctory birthday calls and the occasional holiday text. Olivia was flourishing at our father's firm, her name already appearing in local business journals as a rising star. My parents took 2 trips to Europe that year, visiting museums that housed the very masterpieces I had studied so intensely. Yet, they never once thought to include me or even ask for my perspective. I eventually took a job as a gallery assistant in River North, making just enough to cover my portion of the rent and my ever-growing student loan payments. But that position, as modest as it was, ended up changing the course of my life. The gallery specialized in modern and contemporary art, with a subspecialty in authentication and restoration. I spent every spare moment observing the experts who came through our doors, pestering them with questions on their lunch breaks and staying late to watch them work. About 6 months into my job, a woman named Evelyn Reed came to the gallery. She was consulting on a potential Ed Pashka piece that had emerged from a private collection. Evelyn, in her late 50s, had a formidable reputation as one of the top authenticators in the field. Something about the painting felt off to her, but she couldn't pinpoint the exact reason. During her 3rd visit, I happened to be alone in the gallery, closing up for the night, while she was still examining the canvas under a special lamp. I watched from my desk, captivated by her meticulous process. When she sighed in frustration, I mustered all my courage. "The layering of the neon pigments is wrong," I said quietly, "and the cross hatching in the lower left corner lacks the aggressive energy of his authentic works from that period." Evelyn turned and stared at me, her expression one of complete surprise. "What did you just say?" I swallowed nervously but pressed on, pointing out several other small inconsistencies I had noticed during her previous visits, details I had picked up on after spending my nights poring over books on Paschke's techniques and cataloging his known works. Instead of dismissing me, Evelyn invited me for coffee the next morning. That coffee turned into a 4-hour deep dive into art authentication, forgery techniques, and my personal history. By the time we parted, she had offered me an apprenticeship at her firm, telling me she had never encountered someone with such an innate, intuitive eye for the subtle tells of a forgery. Over the next 5 years, I built an entirely new life under Evelyn's mentorship. I learned both the science and the art of authentication, how to analyze pigments, canvas materials, aging patterns, brushwork, and the countless ways forgers inadvertently betray themselves. My natural talent, honed by rigorous training, made me a valuable asset in a field where true expertise was both rare and highly compensated. By the time I was 28, I had my own apartment downtown, a burgeoning reputation, and complete financial independence. I had found genuine friends who valued me for my intellect and my skills, not for how well I fit into some predetermined family mold. For the first time in my life, I felt secure in who I was and what I could contribute to the world. My contact with my family remained minimal, Christmas cards and brief birthday texts. My parents seemed to have accepted that I was on my own path, though they never showed any real interest in understanding it. Olivia had married a man named Mark Jennings, another financial advisor with the right pedigree. Their wedding was a society event, featured in a Chicago lifestyle magazine, an event I was invited to but chose not to attend, sending a modest gift in my place. Then, the surprising invitation arrived. An email from Olivia in early November, its tone uncharacteristically warm, insisting that I come home for Thanksgiving. "The family misses you," she wrote. "It's been too long, and we should all be together for the holidays. Mom and Dad talk about you more than you know." My first instinct was to refuse. 5 years of distance had given me a clear perspective on the toxic family dynamics, and I was at peace with keeping them at a safe distance. But something about the timing felt off. Why the sudden enthusiastic outreach after years of bare minimum contact? Driven by curiosity, I checked my family's social media, something I rarely did. My father's company website revealed some unsettling changes. 2 senior partners had recently departed, and their annual client appreciation gala had been canceled for the first time in over a decade. My mother's usually active social media, filled with posts about art acquisitions, had gone silent for months. Something was clearly amiss with the family's finances, and now, all of a sudden, they wanted me, the long-ignored artistic daughter, to come home. My suspicions were on high alert, but instead of declining the invitation, I decided to do a little preliminary research. Using my professional network, I discreetly inquired about my parents' art collection, which had been profiled in several publications over the years. What I found was deeply troubling. 3 major pieces from their collection had been sold at auction within the past year, all fetching prices well below their appraised values and going to anonymous buyers, a classic sign of someone needing fast, untraceable cash. Armed with this information and a mounting sense of dread, I accepted Olivia's invitation. But before I flew to Chicago, I made copies of the auction records and several other documents that I suspected might come in handy. Whatever game my family was playing, I was not going to walk into it unprepared this time. The car from O'Hare wound through the familiar suburban streets, autumn leaves dancing in its wake as we neared the house I grew up in. The property looked as pristine as ever, but I picked up on subtle signs of strain. The luxury cars in the driveway were a model year or 2 old. The elaborate seasonal decorations my mother usually reveled in seemed more subdued. My father opened the door, his smile tight and not quite reaching his eyes. "Chloe," he said, his voice stiff as he gave me a brief, formal hug that felt more like a business handshake. "Good to have you home." My mother appeared behind him, looking as elegant as ever in a cashmere sweater set, but I saw new lines of tension around her eyes that even her expert makeup couldn't hide. "You look well," she said, her eyes scanning my outfit. I had chosen it carefully, a simple but well-made black dress and boots that projected professional success without appearing ostentatious. "Chicago must agree with you. I've made a good life for myself," I replied, my tone deliberately neutral. "My work is very fulfilling." "Still doing that art thing?" my father asked as he led me into the living room where a fire was crackling in the hearth. "What is it you do exactly?" "Authentication and appraisal," I corrected him. "I verify the legitimacy of artworks and determine their market value." He gave a vague nod, clearly bored by the details. Before the silence could become too awkward, the front door swung open again, and Olivia swept in with a burst of energy that felt completely manufactured. "My baby sister!" she cried, wrapping me in a tight, performative embrace. "I can't believe you're finally here. We have so much to talk about." Her husband, Mark, followed her in, carrying their bags. He gave me a nod and a smile that seemed genuinely warm, a stark contrast to my family's chilly reception. "It's great to finally meet you, Chloe. Olivia talks about you all the time." This took me by surprise, as I highly doubted I was a frequent topic in my sister's conversations. I watched Mark closely, noticing how his eyes darted around the room and how his smile wavered when Olivia looped her arm possessively through his. He seemed uncomfortable, though he was trying his best to conceal it. As we settled down for drinks before dinner, I mentally took stock of the living room, where my mother's most prized pieces of art had always been on display. Several were conspicuously gone, with lighter patches on the wallpaper marking where they used to hang. A beloved Winslow Homer watercolor had been swapped out for a minor piece by a lesser-known artist. a massive abstract expressionist painting that had dominated the space above the fireplace for as long as I could remember, was gone entirely, replaced by a large, ornate mirror that conveniently made the room feel larger. "I see you've been rearranging the collection," I commented casually, watching my mother's reaction. "The Edward Hopper sketch is gone." My mother's hand clenched around the stem of her wine glass. "We sent a few pieces out for professional cleaning and restoration. The humidity last summer was particularly harsh on some of the older works." "All at the same time?" I asked innocently. "Most collectors stagger their restorations to avoid having so many gaps in their collection." My father interjected sharply. "Not everyone follows the same rulebook, Chloe. Your mother has her own methods." Olivia quickly steered the conversation elsewhere, launching into a series of anecdotes about her successes at the firm and Mark's recent promotion. Throughout dinner, I observed the subtle power dynamics. My parents constantly deferred to Olivia, while exchanging tense, unspoken glances when they thought no one was looking. Mark ate quietly, offering little to the conversation and drinking more than anyone else at the table. After the meal, I excused myself to unpack in my old bedroom, which had been converted into a sterile guest room, every trace of my adolescence scrubbed away. As I put my things away, I heard raised voices coming from my father's study downstairs. Moving silently into the hallway, I could just make out fragments of an argument between Olivia and our parents. "She doesn't suspect a thing," Olivia insisted. "Just stick to the plan." "This isn't what we agreed to," my mother retorted, her voice strained with anxiety. "The Renoir was never supposed to be part of it. We don't have a choice anymore," Olivia hissed. "Not unless you want to lose the entire house." Their voices dropped to a whisper, and I retreated to my room, my mind racing. What was this plan they were talking about, and what did it have to do with me being here? Later that evening, I slipped downstairs to get a glass of water and ran into Sam Jones, the son of our former handyman, who, to my surprise, had been hired as my father's personal assistant. We had been friendly as kids before our lives diverged. His presence was an unexpected but welcome sight, a familiar face not entangled in the family's web of tension. "Chloe Pierce," he said with a genuine smile. "The prodigal artist returns." "Sam," I replied warmly. "I had no idea you were working for my dad now." We chatted for a few minutes about his job and my life in the city. As he was getting ready to leave, he paused at the door. "Listen, Chloe," he said in a low voice, glancing around to make sure we were alone. "Be careful with Olivia. She's not the same person you grew up with. There's stuff happening here that—" He trailed off as he heard footsteps approaching. "Stuff like what?" I pressed. "Just watch your back," he whispered. "And maybe we can talk tomorrow. I have some information you probably ought to know." After Sam left, I decided to do some reconnaissance. The house was now silent, my family having retired for the night. I made my way to the small, climate-controlled gallery where my mother kept her most valuable pieces. Using my phone's flashlight to avoid drawing attention, I began my inspection. What I discovered confirmed my worst suspicions. 3 of the remaining major works showed subtle but undeniable signs of being forgeries. They weren't clumsy fakes. They were sophisticated replicas that would fool the average observer. The Renoir my mother had mentioned in her argument with Olivia was there, but it was definitely not the original I remembered from my childhood. The brushwork was a little too deliberate, lacking the master's signature fluidity. The craquelure pattern in the paint was artificially induced, not a product of natural aging. Someone had been systematically swapping out original masterpieces with high-quality fakes, and, I presumed, selling the real ones. Given the combined value of the pieces I knew were missing or replaced, We were talking about millions of dollars. And based on the argument I'd overheard, Olivia was the architect of the entire scheme. I returned to my room and meticulously documented my findings, adding them to the file I had brought with me. Tomorrow was Thanksgiving, and I had a feeling it was going to bring a series of revelations that no one in my family was prepared for. Thanksgiving Day arrived bright and cold, with sunlight streaming through the frost-etched windows. The house was already a hive of activity when I came downstairs. My mother was in the kitchen, directing caterers and obsessing over the placement of every dish and napkin. My father sat at the breakfast nook, reviewing documents from work, seemingly oblivious to the holiday preparations swirling around him. "Good morning," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Anything I can do to help?" My mother barely looked up from her inspection of a floral centerpiece. "Everything is handled. Olivia is taking care of the seating chart, and the food is being professionally managed." Of course, Olivia was handling the seating. She had always been a master of controlling social dynamics, strategically placing people where they could either be showcased or marginalized, all according to her own agenda. Throughout the morning, I watched the household preparations while casually continuing my survey of the artwork displayed throughout the house. My suspicions were confirmed with each piece I examined. At least 8 major works had been replaced with forgeries of varying quality. Some were exceptional reproductions that most people would never question. Others had telltale signs that anyone with my training could spot. Inconsistent aging, the use of modern materials disguised as period-appropriate ones, and brush techniques that mimicked but failed to truly capture the original artist's hands. By noon, the extended family began to arrive. Uncle James, my father's older and more successful brother, who had made a fortune in commercial real estate, arrived first with Aunt Carol and their adult children. My cousins, whom I hadn't spoken to in years, greeted me with an artificial warmth, their eyes quickly assessing my appearance, searching for signs of failure they could gossip about later. Uncle James, a noted art collector himself, paused by a Degas reproduction in the foyer. I watched him closely, wondering if he would spot the fake. He frowned for a moment, but then moved on without a word as Olivia quickly swooped in to guide him toward the bar. More relatives flooded in, filling the house with forced laughter and the kind of superficial chatter that passes for connection in families more concerned with appearances than authenticity. Olivia moved through the room like a seasoned politician, touching arms, laughing at jokes, and making sure everyone was supplied with drinks and compliments. She kept shooting glances in my direction, ensuring I wasn't getting too deeply engaged in conversation with anyone. By the time we all gathered around the elaborately decorated dining table, 22 family members were present. I found myself seated between a distant cousin whose name I barely recalled and Mark, who seemed to be deliberately keeping his distance from Olivia. My father carved the turkey with the same methodical precision he applied to his business dealings. Olivia expertly kept the conversation flowing, steering it away from anything too personal or potentially volatile. I noticed she was drinking heavily, refilling her wine glass frequently, her animation growing with each sip. Her perfect mask was beginning to show tiny cracks, a sharp edge creeping into her voice whenever Mark tried to contribute to the conversation. "So, Chloe," Aunt Carol said during the main course, "Olivia tells us you work in an art gallery in Chicago. How charming. Is it one of those modern places with all the bizarre installations?" "Actually," I replied calmly, "I'm an art authenticator and appraiser. I work with museums, auction houses, and private collectors to verify the legitimacy and value of significant artworks." Uncle James looked up, his interest suddenly piqued. "Authentication? That's a highly specialized field. Which firm are you with?" Before I could respond, Olivia cut in. Enough about Chloe's little job. Did everyone hear about the charity gala I'm chairing next month? We've already secured pledges from the governor and 2 state senators. But Uncle James wasn't so easily deflected. I'd be interested to hear more about your work, Chloe. I have a few pieces in my own collection that I've always been a bit uncertain about. I'd be happy to take a look at them for you sometime, I offered, noticing the way my mother's knuckles turned white as she gripped her fork. The meal continued, the tension simmering just beneath the surface of polite conversation. As dessert was being served, Olivia's movements became slightly unsteady, her smile fixed and glassy. She suddenly stood up, tapping her wine glass for attention. The room fell silent. I want to thank everyone for coming to our family Thanksgiving, she began, her words slightly slurred. Family is everything, isn't it? The people who stand by you, who support you, who contribute to the greater good of the whole. Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. My father was watching Olivia with growing alarm, while my mother maintained her perfect hostess smile, though her eyes held a clear warning. Which is why, Olivia continued, her voice hardening, we sometimes have to make difficult decisions about who really belongs. Her gaze locked directly onto me. We have tolerated Chloe's rebellion for years, her rejection of our family's values, her refusal to contribute anything meaningful to the Pierce legacy. The room became uncomfortably quiet. Several relatives shifted awkwardly in their seats, while others leaned forward, their faces alight with the morbid anticipation that always accompanies public conflict. Olivia, my father said, his tone a sharp warning. Perhaps this isn't the time. No, Dad, we agreed, she insisted, the flush of alcohol bright on her cheeks. We all agreed it was time. She straightened her shoulders, preparing to deliver the blow she had clearly been planning since my arrival. We voted, Chloe. The family voted. And you're not part of it anymore. You're not family anymore. Gasps and shocked murmurs erupted around the table. Some relatives looked appalled, others nodded in solemn agreement. My parents sat frozen, neither contradicting nor supporting Olivia's declaration. Everyone here agreed, Olivia pressed on, gaining confidence from the chaos she had unleashed. You contribute nothing. You take nothing. You mean nothing to the Pierce name. A strange, cold calm settled over me as I looked at my sister's triumphant, distorted face, at my parents' averted gazes, at the mix of embarrassment and lurid fascination on the faces of my relatives. This moment of public excommunication should have destroyed me. Instead, it felt like the final, definitive confirmation of a truth I had always known, but never fully allowed myself to accept. I let out a soft laugh, a sound that sliced through the tense atmosphere like a knife. Then you won't need this, I said quietly, reaching into my bag and placing the manila folder on the table. Family should have no secrets, after all. Olivia stared at the folder, her confusion quickly morphing into alarm. What is that supposed to be? Open it, I suggested. Since I'm not family, I have no obligation to protect family secrets, do I? With trembling hands, Olivia snatched the folder and flipped it open. Her face drained of all color as she scanned the contents. Photographs of the original artworks at auction, detailed documentation of the forgeries currently hanging in the house, financial records showing massive, undisclosed transactions. This is nothing, she stammered, trying to shove the papers back into the folder. Just some of my work documents. May I? Uncle James asked, his voice carrying the authority of the family patriarch as he reached for the folder. Olivia was too stunned to resist as he took it from her. As he reviewed the documents, his expression grew dark and stormy. These are records of art forgeries, he announced to the stunned table, and documentation of sales for what appear to be original works from Robert and Helen's collection. He looked up, his gaze piercing my parents. "Did you authorize any of this?" My mother's perfect composure finally shattered. "James, this is all just a misunderstanding." But it was too late. Olivia, realizing she was completely exposed, let out a raw scream of horror that silenced the entire room. "You witch!" she shrieked at me. "You came here to destroy us." "No," I replied calmly. "I came because you invited me. The real question is why. Why, after all these years, was my presence suddenly so critical? Perhaps because you needed a scapegoat for the financial disaster you created." The meticulously planned Thanksgiving dinner dissolved into chaos. Some relatives immediately began making excuses, grabbing their coats and muttering about family privacy. Others remained, riveted by the unfolding drama, eager to gather every sordid detail for later dissection. In the middle of the turmoil, I stayed seated, watching as years of family pretense and curated perfectionism crumbled into dust under the weight of an exposed truth. The reckoning had finally arrived. As the initial shockwave receded, the relatives who remained gathered in the living room, the abandoned Thanksgiving feast growing cold on the dining table. Uncle James had assumed command, his authority as the eldest Pierce sibling going unchallenged, even by my father, who sat with his head in his hands, looking as if he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "Chloe," Uncle James said gravely, "explain what you found, all of it." I stood by the fireplace, acutely aware of every eye in the room on me. For the last 2 years, original artworks from this house have been systematically replaced with forgeries and sold through various auction houses, mainly in Europe and Asia, where questions of provenance might attract less scrutiny. I gestured to the folder, which was now spread open on the coffee table. The records in that folder show that at least 14 major works have been sold, generating approximately $8.2 million. The forgeries that replace them are of varying quality. Some are quite sophisticated, but others have clear flaws that a trained observer could easily identify. "This is preposterous," my mother interjected weakly. "We would know if our own collection had been tampered with." "Would you?" I countered. "When was the last time you had the collection professionally appraised or authenticated?" "Most serious collectors do so every 3 to 5 years. Her silence was all the answer I needed, confirming my long-held suspicion that their knowledge of art was entirely superficial, a prop for their social standing. "The money," my father said, his voice hoarse. "Where did it go?" All eyes swiveled to Olivia, who was standing by the bar, pouring herself another drink with shaking hands. Mark had moved away from her, now standing closer to the door as if planning a quick escape. "You don't understand the pressure," she said, her voice cracking. "The firm was in trouble. We lost 2 major clients last year, and the market turned against our key positions. I needed capital to cover the losses before other clients found out." "You stole from your own parents?" Aunt Carol asked, her earlier judgment of me now redirected squarely at Olivia. "I borrowed it," Olivia snapped. "I was going to replace everything once the market recovered. It was a temporary measure." "And the forgeries?" Uncle James pressed. "That required planning, connections to skilled forgers, a sophisticated understanding of how to move artwork discreetly." Olivia's eyes flickered toward Mark, who went pale. "Don't you dare look at me," he protested, holding up his hands. "I told you this was a terrible idea from the very beginning." "I first became suspicious," I explained, cutting through their argument, "when I noticed several pieces from the collection had appeared at auction recently. When I arrived here, I confirmed my suspicions by examining the remaining works." "She's making this all up," Olivia tried weakly. "She's always been jealous of me, of my place in this family." "The evidence seems quite clear," Uncle James replied coldly. lifting a photograph from the folder. This Renoir sold at a London auction 8 months ago for $1.4 million. And yet, a very similar-looking Renoir is still hanging in your mother's sitting room. He looked at me. Is the one currently displayed authentic? No, I stated. It's a high-quality reproduction, but several technical aspects are wrong. The canvas is too new and has been artificially aged. The pigment composition includes elements that weren't available when Renoir was painting. The brushwork is close, but it lacks the spontaneous energy of the original. My father finally looked directly at Olivia, his eyes filled with a dawning horror. How bad is it at the firm? The real situation. Olivia's composure finally shattered completely. We're on the verge of total collapse, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. I made some high-risk investments trying to recoup earlier losses, and they went bad. Then I started using client funds to cover margin calls. It just spiraled. The room fell silent as the true magnitude of the situation sank in. This wasn't just about stolen art. It was about serious financial crimes that could lead to prison time. Sam, who had been observing quietly from the doorway, stepped forward. I have additional documentation, he said, surprising everyone. I've been tracking discrepancies in the firm's accounts for the past year. Client funds have been misappropriated, and signatures have been forged on transfer authorizations. You were spying on me? Olivia gasped. I was doing my job, Sam replied firmly. When I noticed irregularities, I documented them. I was hoping there was an explanation that wouldn't destroy the company and everyone who depends on it. My father stood up, his businessman's instincts finally kicking in and overriding his paternal blindness. We need to call the lawyers. Now. As the family began to process this new development, the way they looked at me started to change. The black sheep, the daughter long dismissed as impractical and aimless, had just uncovered a massive fraud that might have bankrupted them all. The irony that my impractical art education had provided the exact expertise needed to save them was not lost on anyone. Uncle James approached me while my parents huddled with Sam, reviewing his documents. Your work, he said quietly. Which firm did you say you were with? The other relatives, who had always deferred to Olivia, now approached me with questions, suddenly acknowledging my existence after years of treating me like an afterthought. My parents looked shell-shocked, alternating between hushed, frantic discussions about damage control and staring blankly at the evidence of their daughter's betrayal. Olivia, seeing her perfectly constructed world imploding, made a desperate move, grabbing her coat and keys to flee. Mark blocked her path at the door. Move, she hissed. We need to get out of here now. No, he said firmly. Running will only make it worse. I'm not going to be your accomplice anymore. You already are, she reminded him viciously. Under duress, he shot back. And I'm done. I'm staying to face this. You should too. The look of utter betrayal on her face as her own husband chose integrity over loyalty was a perfect mirror of how I had felt for most of my life in this very house. The hours that followed the Thanksgiving revelation were a chaotic blur of phone calls, impromptu legal meetings, and frantic consultations. Most of the extended family had left, leaving only the core group and those directly involved in managing the crisis. Uncle James stayed, his calm demeanor and business acumen providing a much-needed anchor. My father spent most of the night closeted in his study with the family attorney, emerging periodically with a grayer, more haggard complexion each time. My mother oscillated between a state of silent shock and frantic bursts of activity, as if rearranging decorative objects could somehow restore order to our shattered family narrative. Olivia had locked herself in the guest room she shared with Mark, though he had chosen to sleep on the sofa downstairs. Around midnight, when a fragile quiet had finally settled over the house, I stepped out onto the back porch. The night was crisp and clear, the stars brilliant above the bare trees. I heard the door open behind me and turned to see my father. He looked smaller somehow, his shirt rumpled and his tie uncharacteristically loose. "The lawyers think we might be able to recover some of the artwork," he said without any preamble. "The provenance was falsified, but the sales themselves leave a paper trail." I nodded. Many legitimate buyers would rather return the pieces quietly than get entangled in a legal battle over stolen art. He was silent for a long moment. "Why didn't you come to us directly with this? Why the public spectacle?" The question was so profoundly oblivious that I almost laughed. "Would you have believed me over Olivia? Has that ever once happened in the history of this family?" His lack of an answer was answer enough. "Besides," I continued, "I didn't plan a confrontation. Olivia orchestrated that all by herself with her grand announcement that I was no longer family. She created the perfect stage for the truth to come out." He sighed, his breath a white cloud in the cold air. "The firm is in serious trouble. Sam's documentation shows client fund misappropriation going back 18 months. We're looking at criminal charges, regulatory fines, civil lawsuits." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, he was still my father, and his life's work was disintegrating before his eyes. "Your sister," he began, then paused, collecting himself. "Olivia will almost certainly face charges. The DA might be willing to offer a deal in exchange for full cooperation and restitution, but that depends on how much we can recover." I considered this. "What do you need from me?" "The lawyer thinks your testimony about the forgeries would strengthen the case that Olivia acted alone in defrauding us. It would help separate the art thefts from the firm's broader issues, potentially salvaging what's left of the business." "You want me to help protect the family name," I translated, right after being told I'm not part of the family. He had the decency to look ashamed. "We never voted on anything. That was all Olivia. Your mother and I never—" He trailed off, unable to finish the denial that we both knew was a lie in spirit, if not in fact. "I'll have to think about it," I said finally. My cooperation would come with conditions. Before he could respond, the door opened again, and my mother stepped out. She had removed all her makeup, revealing the true depth of the stress etched on her face. "The Lawrences just called," she told my father, her voice flat. "They're pulling their accounts first thing in the morning. Word is already spreading." As they began to discuss this new fire, I slipped back inside, leaving them to the crisis they had enabled through years of willful blindness. The next morning brought a strange, hollow calm. Breakfast was a silent, awkward affair. Sam arrived early with more financial records, now working openly to triage the damage to the firm. Around mid-morning, I ran into Olivia in the hallway. She looked haggard, her designer outfit from the previous day replaced with old sweatpants and a t-shirt I recognized from her college years. "Come to gloat?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "No," I replied. "I came for Thanksgiving dinner. You were the one with the hidden agenda." She sagged against the wall, suddenly looking exhausted. "I messed up so badly," she whispered. "I just kept thinking I could fix it. If I just had a little more time, a little more money." "Why the art?" I asked. "Why not sell property or other assets?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "Because no one ever really looked at it. Mom and Dad collected art because it was prestigious, not because they understood it. They couldn't tell the difference between a masterpiece and a copy." There was a painful truth to her words. "And the plan for Thanksgiving?" I pressed. Was I supposed to be the scapegoat? She slid down the wall to the floor, all pretense gone. The firm's annual audit is next week. Everything was about to come out. I thought if I could create a big family drama centered on you, it might be enough of a distraction to buy me some time. So you announced you were kicking me out of the family to create a spectacle. She nodded miserably. I was desperate and drunk and terrified. And all those years before, I asked, the question that had haunted me since childhood. Why did you always have to diminish me, steal credit for my achievements, make sure I was the family disappointment? For the first time, Olivia looked at me with something that resembled honesty. Because you were free, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. You had the courage to walk away from their expectations and pursue what you loved. I resented that freedom so much. I was trapped in the role of the perfect daughter, terrified of ever disappointing them. So you made sure I would carry that burden instead. Yes, she whispered, and I've hated myself for it every day. The more successful you became on your own terms, the more I resented you. The more I needed to prove you had made the wrong choice. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. Decades of rivalry and resentment distilled into a moment of clarity that had come far too late. I can help, I said finally, with certain conditions. She looked up, confusion replacing the defeat in her eyes. Help how? I have connections in the art world. I can help track down and recover the sold pieces. My expert testimony could help separate your personal fraud from the firm's regulatory issues. It won't make the consequences disappear, but it might mitigate them. Why would you do that? She asked, her bewilderment genuine. After everything? Not for you, I clarified. For the employees at the firm who are about to lose their jobs, for the clients who trusted our family, and maybe a little bit for our parents, who failed both of us in different ways. Later that day, my parents approached me together, the first united front they'd shown since I arrived. They stood awkwardly in the doorway of my room. Sam tells us you've offered to help with the recovery, my father began. I nodded, but I have conditions. Name them, my mother said quietly. First, full public acknowledgement of what happened. No cover-ups. Olivia takes full responsibility. Second, a foundation established with funds from the recovered assets to support young artists who, like me, lack family support. And third, I added, an honest conversation about why you were both so willing to cast me aside for all those years. Not today, but soon. I deserve that much. They exchanged a long, silent glance. Agreed, my father said. All of it. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We failed you, Chloe, she admitted. We had such rigid ideas about what success looked like. By the time we realized our mistake, the distance between us felt too vast to cross. It wasn't the full reckoning I needed, but it was a start. The days following unfolded in a flurry of legal meetings and family reconfiguration. I extended my stay, and Diana, my mentor, even flew in to lend her expertise to the recovery efforts. The consequences for Olivia were significant, but not as catastrophic as they could have been. She entered therapy and rehab, and with our help, her legal team negotiated a plea deal involving community service and restitution. The family firm survived, though it was significantly smaller. My father brought in outside management, finally accepting that the Pierce financial dynasty was over. My relationship with my parents began to evolve. They made awkward but sincere efforts to understand my world. My mother visited my office, and my father started asking questions about authentication techniques, finding surprising parallels to financial forensics. The irony, he admitted one evening, is that the qualities that make you so good at your job, attention to detail, analytical rigor, integrity, are the same qualities I value in business. I just couldn't see them outside my narrow definition of success. By the spring, 6 months after that fateful Thanksgiving, the family gathered again. The occasion was the launch of the Pierce Foundation for Arts Education. Natalie attended, looking healthier and more at peace than I had ever seen her. "I'm thinking of going back to school," she told me quietly, "for psychology, to understand why people do the things they do, including myself." "That sounds like a good path," I replied sincerely. My anger had mostly faded, replaced by a cautious hope. Diana watched our interaction from across the room. "You've come full circle," she said to me later, "using your success to rebuild what was broken." "Not rebuild," I corrected her. "Build something new. The old structure was rotten to the core." The foundation became my main tie to Chicago. I established a branch of my authentication firm there, with Uncle James as my first and most enthusiastic client. My relationship with my parents became something we were still defining, not the blind adoration they'd given Olivia, nor the dismissal they'd aimed at me, but a new respect between adults. At a dinner celebrating the Foundation's first scholarship recipients, my mother raised a glass. "To finding family," she said, "not just in the people we're born to, but in those who see and value us for who we truly are." It wasn't a perfect ending. Scars remained. But we had found a new way forward, one built not on lies and expectations, but on a fragile, hard-won truth. I would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to redefine family on more authentic terms. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the greatest gift we can give each other is the freedom to be truly seen.